Hi, I'm Olajide Paris, and today I'm going to be reviewing the HiFiMan Ananda Stealth headphone. And specifically today, we're going to be talking about how and if you can use it to mix live orchestra. Let's get started. So the first thing that you need when mixing, whether that's on headphones or monitors, but especially on headphones, is that you want adequate reference material. That means recordings that are mixed and mastered in high quality and that are in a similar genre and maybe have a similar instrumentation to the material that you are mixing. How do you use references? Well, I like to use a program like Metric AB, which is included in the Plugin Alliance suite. Otherwise, I like to use any kind of EQ that has a spectrogram so that I can easily compare the content from the reference mix to my work in progress mix. So you may be asking, where do you get this reference material? And that's a great question. There are many ways to source reference material, and I'll just go through some of them. First of all, there's CD. CD has kind of over time been the more or less standard way of referencing recordings. Although these days, getting a CD into your DAW is less than straightforward. Most computers don't come with a dedicated DVD or CD player, so that can be challenging. And although the quality is there in terms of CD, you're getting a master level recording. The problem is that if you just want a single track from a CD to reference as a reference mix, you end up having to buy an entire CD just for that one reference. So the positives are that it's high quality. The negatives are that it might be difficult for you to get a CD or DVD player. And lastly, it can end up being expensive if you want to build up a library of lots of references across a lot of genres. It can just be cost prohibitive to do so with CDs. An option to CDs, if you want to go the similar route, is you can buy high quality a la carte downloads from hi-fi web pages, and there's a lot of websites online where you can just buy recordings in FLAC or high resolution WAV or whatever, and that can be a good solution. The only issue with that really is that a lot of those sources may not have soundtrack material. So if you're a composer like me and you want specifically to mix for soundtracks, you're going to want to be referencing film soundtracks, and those often are not available as single downloads from a lot of the sites. But if you're doing lots of classical music, that's another story. Another option, and I've used this many times, is to use the loop back function on your audio interface, especially if you have something like an RME interface. Other interfaces do have this functionality, but RME specifically, I love for the loopback functionality to be able to record the output of whatever program that I have on my computer back into a DAW. And that could be anything from Spotify or Deezer or whatever, even YouTube. YouTube I recommend a little bit less for reasons I'll talk about later. Another tool you can use is Audio Lens by iZotope. What's really cool about Audio Lens is that it will basically take a snapshot of the equalization profile of any track that's playing from your computer, whether that's from streaming or whatever, and then you can save that onto your computer as a profile that you can then use with other programs within the iZotope ecosystem. So that's a great one too. It doesn't give you a recording to listen to, but it does give you an EQ profile if you want to look visually or if you want to use any of the EQ matching features from any of the iZotope plugins. The last option is YouTube. This is my least preferred option. First of all, it's not exactly legal, and second of all, the quality is not great. The variety of quality that people upload onto YouTube is just very, very wide. There can be a lot of frequency information that's just truncated, either due to the person who ripped the audio or due to YouTube's own algorithms that try to save data. So your mileage may vary, but if you need to in an emergency, that is an option that you can take. I will not give you steps for how to do that. You can figure that out for yourself. So the other thing that you need to mix on headphones successfully is a high quality listening system. So that means you're going to want to get out of your budget things like the Focusrite Scarletts of the world or anything that's like in the $200 or $300 range. If you're going to be serious about mixing with headphones, you want something that is going to be resolving enough and have enough power to drive the high quality headphones, which we'll get to a little bit later. This is, after all, a headphone review. For me, that means something like the Babyface Pro FS by RME, and that's, I believe, the minimum standard anybody should be using if they're serious about mixing and headphones. And in general, that's just a good benchmark for a high quality interface with high quality headphone amp and converters. What you'll find a lot in a lot of the cheaper interfaces, especially lower end stuff like Focusrite or whatever, is just it's not very resolving, it's noisy, and doesn't have a lot of power for headphones, all of which you need. So the Babyface Pro FS is a great option. Right around $700. You can find it sometimes on sale or B stock for a little bit less. And that's one of my mainstays that I use a lot of the time, especially when traveling. Besides the Babyface Pro FS, the other unit that I used extensively in this review, which I've owned a couple of years, is the Grace Design M900. Now, unlike the Babyface Pro, which is a full-on audio interface, you can record with it, you can mix and master with it, the M900 is specifically a dedicated DAC, or digital to analog converter, which you can connect directly to your headphones. That's all it does. It's got a great converter. And for that reason, it just exists kind of in its own category. The resolve is just levels beyond what you get at any similar price point in an all-in-one unit like the Babyface Pro FS. Its only drawback, I would say, well, there's two, is that it's not quite as powerful as the Babyface Pro FS, which I find can drive more power to headphones, even to something like the Ananda Stealth, which I promise we will get to in a moment. The other disadvantage to the Grace M900 is the connectivity. You're going to have to use a mini USB to USB and then probably go in through a USB hub if you're on a Mac. If you're on a PC, that's obviously not as big of a deal. But when I'm mobile anyway, I'm Mac-based. When I'm in the studio, I've got a PC, so it's not as big of a deal. But the other positive thing that the Grace M900 has going for it is that it has a crossfeed function, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Okay, so the next thing that you need to consider when mixing with headphones is imaging. Now, the thing is that when you're mixing in studio monitors, or anytime you're listening to audio, you have to consider that what is coming from the left of an image and what's coming from the right of an image is being fed into each ear. Our ears don't distinguish between those things, so even though something might be coming from the left, you're still hearing it in your right ear. The problem with headphones is that you don't have that same paradigm. What's coming from the left goes into the left exclusively, and vice versa with the right. So there are a lot of tools that have been created over the years to overcome that problem mixing with headphones. As I mentioned before, on my Grace Design M900, it has a built-in crossfeed function, which essentially just sends a little portion of the left into the right ear and a little portion of the right signal into the left ear. And I find that that makes for much more realistic sound staging. And the great thing is that it's not in software, so I just hit the setting on that converter, and I have that over everything that I'm listening to. Now, if you don't have that converter specifically, and there are a couple of others that do that as well, you can use a program like Gigahertz Can Opener, which is a really great program. I think it's only about 30 or 40 bucks. And that's something that you can just slap on your master mix. Remember to turn it off when you export, of course, and that will also give you a range of options and a little bit more flexibility than something like the M900, but that will help recreate the experience of mixing in studio monitors. But with something like Gigahertz Can Opener or the M900 crossfeed function, what you'll get is the ability to make better judgments about the imaging when you're mixing and when you're panning things, because your experience will be much more similar to what it would be if you were mixing with studio monitors. So the last thing that you need to mix live orchestra on headphones is obviously a pair of high quality headphones. And so that's the subject today. We're talking about the HiFiMan Ananda Stealth. I recently mixed all of the demo recordings that I recorded of my own music and music of others, recorded with live strings, woodwinds, and choir at a scoring stage here in Armenia on this headphone. So to answer the first question, can you mix live orchestra on headphones? The answer is yes. I'm going to talk a little bit about the process and specifically how this headphone compares to other headphones below and above its price point in that task, as I did probably 85% of the mixing of those demos on this headphone and just checking on other headphones along the way. So before I get into specific models that I compared this headphone to, I'll just talk a little bit about why I like planar magnetic headphones in general. Now, planar magnetic headphones are a different technology to something that you'll find in like a Sony MDR 7506 or like an HD 600 or 650 by Sennheiser, which are moving coil designs. The benefits of a planar magnetic are that they have a much faster transient response, which makes listening to things like plucked instruments or harps or percussion a lot more detail oriented. You're able to hear the transients with a lot more detail. In general, there's a lot less distortion, especially at higher volumes, which becomes important, obviously, when monitoring and listening back at high volumes. And in general, they're just a lot more resolving than dynamic driver headphones. The first headphone that I'm going to compare the Ananda to is this, the Beyerdynamic DT990 Pro. Not only was this my first open back headphone, but this is a headphone that you've probably heard before that you can buy all around the world and is pretty cheap, under $200. Quite honestly, this and not just this, but the first version of the Ananda, which was my first planar magnetic headphone and my first HiFiMan headphone, compared to this sounds like a lie. The first thing that I noticed when listening to the HiFiMan Ananda, even the earlier version, which I will compare this to later, is that there's just so much more information in the recordings that I had been listening to for years that I just was not getting here. And the interesting thing is that when I go back and I listen on this again, I can kind of hear those details buried, really subdued in the mix, but with something like this that really resolves, they're just obvious things like page turns, things like breaths, which are really, really important when you're either producing sample libraries like I do a lot or mixing Orchestra, is that you want to be able to hear as much of the environment as possible. That also includes things like room information, the reverb tails of the room, and all of that. And that's really important for judging how much reverb to apply or other problems that might exist in the room. So it's really not close. This is just kind of trash compared to this, and this is a perfectly serviceable headphone. You can see I have it with me now. It's just kind of like that old pair of shoes that you've been wearing for many years, and it just fits on comfortably, and you know how it feels. So I keep them around, but for doing any kind of critical listening or mixing, this is more or less the bare minimum that I would use. Although I do check on something like this, like I did in the process of mixing my orchestra recordings, because there are plenty of people who have a headphone like this, and I need to make sure that my mixes translate onto something like the DT990 Pro. The next headphone that I'll compare this to is the ubiquitous Sennheiser HD 600 or 650. Now, I do not own this headphone, but it's one that everybody has heard, and it's among audiophiles and among composers and producers considered to be a very, very good headphone, kind of the baseline standard for a quality open back headphone. So while I don't own an HD 600 or 650, it is a headphone I've used quite a bit. I even used one yesterday at the scoring stage where I was recording a solo violin. And I often like to use headphones. If I don't bring my own, I'll use whatever the studio has, just so that I can listen in a little bit more intimacy and hear the detail of what I'm recording. Now, compared to the Ananda, the HD 600 and 650 are a lot more mellow. The sound staging is a little bit more collapsed. It's a little bit more intimate. And just in general, there's less detail, and it's a little less hyped, I guess you would say, in the upper mid. So it's a great standard, but this beats it pretty handily, both in terms of resolution and soundstage. The next headphone that I'll compare this to is its predecessor, the original HiFiMan Ananda. As I mentioned before, that was my introduction into planar magnetic headphones. That was my first kind of high-end headphone purchase. It served me very well over the years, and I recently gave that away to my assistant because she needed better headphones. She needed a much better monitoring environment. So it's actually visually identical to this, so there's no reason to kind of show them both on camera. But what I can say is that the Ananda Stealth has more treble, so it's going to be a lot more resolving. When initially comparing this to the original, it was a little bit difficult to figure out which was which in blind tests, but I did eventually come to the conclusion that this was the better of the two headphones, at least in terms of resolution. So this is certainly an improvement on the original design. The final headphone that I'll compare this to is its bigger brother, which is the HiFiMan Aria Stealth. Now, this is a headphone that I reviewed last year, and it's a great headphone. I use it every day, and I made sure to limit myself to using that just for checks here and there while mixing with this. And what I will say is that despite the fact that the Stealth is about twice the price of this, we'll talk about price a little bit later, the differences are not as huge as I expected. There's a little bit more soundstage in the Aria Stealth. There's certainly more resolution, but for me, it's a difference of about 10 to 15% in terms of the amount of resolution and the quality gains in soundstage. I would definitely prefer the Aria to this if I had a choice between just one headphone, but the fact that this comes even that close to a headphone almost twice its price is super impressive. So, can you mix live orchestra with the HiFiMan Ananda Stealth? I absolutely think so. If you follow my directions earlier, you use high quality reference material, you use the right monitoring tools, and you use that in conjunction with high quality DACs and converters like the Babyface Pro FS or the Gris Design M900 or whatever you can get your hands on that's high enough quality, you should have absolutely no problems mixing your next live orchestra recordings on this. If you need a good quality mobile solution, this comes in at just under 700 bucks, which is a great price for what it is. If you're just looking to get into the world of higher end headphones, this is a great price point to drop right in, and I cannot say enough good things about this headphone. Thanks for watching.